The morning sun peeked through the grimy windows of Rosie's diner, stretching long shadows across the checkered linoleum floor. Grace Miller moved between the tables with practiced ease, her sneakers whispering against the worn surface. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon hung in the air, mingling with the sounds of sizzling griddles and the soft hum of morning chatter. "More coffee, Mr. Patterson?" Grace asked, her smile sincere despite the weariness clouding her green eyes. She'd pulled a double shift yesterday, and her feet still ached, but rent was due in 3 days, and she was $40 short. The elderly man nodded, his calloused hands wrapped around the warm mug. "You're a lifesaver, Grace. Best coffee in Chicago." Grace chuckled softly. "That's because Rosie makes it strong enough to wake the dead. I mean, strong enough to really get you going." She'd been working at Rosie's for 2 years now, ever since she'd arrived in Chicago with nothing but a backpack and a fierce desire to build a better life than the one she'd left behind. The diner sat on the corner of West Taylor Street in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest work, and Grace had come to value that. The bell above the door chimed as Marcus, the morning regular, walked in with his newspaper tucked under his arm. Grace already knew his usual order by heart: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, orange juice. "Morning, Marcus," she called out, grabbing a clean mug. "Morning, Grace. You look beat, kiddo. Rosie working you too hard?" "Just saving up," Grace replied, pouring his coffee. "Got plans." She didn't go into detail, but the truth was simple. She was 8 credits shy of her associate degree in early childhood education. Community college classes weren't cheap, even with financial aid, and every extra shift brought her closer to her dream of becoming a teacher. She wanted to be the person she'd needed when she was young. Someone who cared, who noticed when a kid was struggling, who made them feel safe. The morning rush intensified as construction workers and office employees poured in for breakfast. Grace moved through the controlled chaos with a grace that lived up to her name, balancing plates, refilling mugs, remembering orders without writing them down. Rosie, the 70-year-old owner who'd given Grace a chance when she desperately needed one, worked the register with her usual gruff efficiency. "Table 6 needs their check," Rosie called out, her gravelly voice cutting through the noise. Grace nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. That's when she saw them, the 3 men who'd just walked in. Something about them felt off. Their eyes scanned the diner too carefully, too calculatingly. They wore expensive suits that seemed out of place in the modest establishment, and they didn't sit down or approach the counter. Grace's instincts, sharpened by years of having to read situations quickly, sent a warning signal through her body. She glanced at Rosie, who'd also noticed the newcomers, her expression hardening with concern. Before Grace could fully process what was happening, 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt outside the diner's windows. More men piled out, and Grace felt her heart rate spike. This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. Then she spotted him, the little boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with dark hair and wide, brown eyes that seemed too serious for a child. He sat in booth 7 with a woman Grace assumed was his nanny, listlessly pushing eggs around his plate with a fork. He wore a private school uniform, navy blue with a crest on the pocket, and looked profoundly sad in the way children do when they're carrying burdens too heavy for their small shoulders. The 3 men in suits moved further into the diner, and Grace noticed one of them touch something at his waistband. Time seemed to slow down as her mind made connections she didn't want to make. "Everybody down!" one of the men suddenly shouted. The diner exploded into chaos. People screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor as customers dove under tables. The sound of shattering glass pierced the air as one of the windows broke. Grace's training, the safety videos Rosie insisted everyone watch, and her own survival instincts from a difficult past all kicked in at once. She didn't think, she just moved. The little boy in booth 7 had frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror, too scared to even cry. The woman with him had dropped to the floor, hands over her head, but the child remained sitting upright, exposed and vulnerable. Grace launched herself across the diner, her body moving faster than her mind could keep up. She reached the boy in what felt like a blink, grabbing him and pulling him down to the floor beneath the table. She positioned her body over his, making herself a shield between him and whatever danger filled the diner. "It's okay, honey," she whispered urgently, her voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I've got you. Just keep your head down and don't look up. I've got you." The boy trembled beneath her, and she felt his small hands clutch at her uniform. He was crying now, silent sobs that shook his little frame. Grace adjusted her position, making sure every inch of him was covered, her arms wrapped protectively around his head. The chaos continued around them. More shouting, the sound of running feet, something heavy crashing to the floor. Grace squeezed her eyes shut and focused on keeping the boy calm, whispering reassurances she barely believed herself. "You're safe. I promise you're safe. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ethan." The boy managed to choke out between sobs. "Ethan, that's a strong name. My name is Grace. I need you to be really brave for me, Ethan. Can you do that? Just stay still and keep your eyes closed." Time lost all meaning. Could have been 30 seconds or 30 minutes. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst. Her body was tense, ready to absorb whatever might come. Every maternal instinct she possessed was focused on protecting this child she didn't even know. Then, cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter, a voice rang out, "Don't touch her." The command was absolute, delivered with such authority that the entire diner seemed to freeze. Grace felt the change in the air, the sudden stillness that follows violence. She didn't dare move, didn't dare lift her head to see who had spoken. Heavy footsteps approached their table. Grace instinctively tightened her hold on Ethan, her body tensing even further. "Ethan." The voice was different now, still commanding, but edged with something that might have been fear. "Ethan, are you hurt, Daddy?" Ethan's small voice was muffled against Grace's shoulder. "Daddy." The word sent a shiver down Grace's spine. She'd thrown herself over the child of someone important, someone dangerous, someone whose presence commanded absolute obedience. "I'm here, son. I'm here." The voice was closer now, right beside the table. "Miss, I need you to let me see my son." Grace slowly, carefully loosened her grip on Ethan but didn't move away. Her eyes met those of the man crouching beside the booth, and her breath caught in her throat. Alexander Romano was not what she'd expected. He was tall. She could tell even when he was crouched down, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples and eyes that were so dark they appeared almost black. His face was angular, handsome in a severe way, with lines that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months. But it was his eyes that captured her attention. They were looking at her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. But there was something else there, too, recognition perhaps, respect, maybe even wonder. "Are you hurt?" he asked her, his voice lower now, meant only for her ears. Grace shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Her arms were still wrapped around Ethan, who hadn't let go of her uniform. "Ethan, come here," Alexander said gently, extending his arms toward his son, but the boy didn't budge. He clung tighter to Grace, his face buried against her shoulder. "She saved me, Daddy. She saved me." Alexander's jaw tightened, and Grace saw something flash across his face, an emotion quickly suppressed. He nodded slowly. "I know she did, son, but I need to see that you're okay." "I'm okay," Ethan said, but still didn't release Grace. Grace finally found her voice. "Ethan, your dad needs to check that you're not hurt. It's okay. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." She didn't know if that last part was true, but it was what Ethan needed to hear. Slowly, reluctantly, the boy loosened his grip and allowed his father to pull him into a thorough but gentle examination. Alexander's hands moved over his son with practiced efficiency, checking for injuries, his face a mask of controlled concern. "He's fine," Alexander finally said, though Grace wasn't sure if he was telling her or himself. He pulled Ethan into a fierce embrace, his eyes closing briefly. Thank God. You're fine. Grace took the opportunity to try to crawl out from under the table, but her legs had turned to jelly. Adrenaline had kept her moving before, but now that the immediate danger had passed, her body was rebelling. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Easy, Alexander said, one hand still holding Ethan while the other reached out to steady Grace. Don't try to stand too quickly. His hand was warm and steady on her arm, and Grace found herself focusing on that point of contact to ground herself. She managed to slide out from under the table and sit back against the booth, her breathing rapid and shallow. The diner was a disaster. Tables and chairs were overturned, broken dishes littered the floor, and the other customers were slowly emerging from their hiding places, many crying or talking rapidly on cell phones. Rosie stood behind the counter, her face pale but her spine straight, already trying to restore order. The men in suits, Alexander's men, Grace realized, were positioned strategically around the diner. The nanny who'd been with Ethan was being helped to her feet by one of them, her face tear-streaked but seemingly unharmed. What happened? Grace managed to ask, her voice hoarse. Alexander's expression hardened. People who don't know when to quit. He stood, still holding Ethan, who had his face pressed against his father's neck. Marcus, secure the perimeter. Thomas, handle the witnesses carefully. The men moved immediately, responding to his orders with military precision. Grace watched, her mind struggling to make sense of the situation. This was Chicago, and she'd heard the stories. Everyone had stories about families who controlled territories, who operated in the shadows, who wielded power that had nothing to do with laws or elections. She'd just thrown herself over the son of someone from that world. Mississippi, Alexander asked, drawing her attention back to him. How did you? He stopped, glancing at her name tag. Right? Yes, Grace Miller. Grace Miller, he repeated as if testing the weight of her name. You threw yourself over my son without hesitation. It wasn't a question, but Grace answered anyway. Anyone would have done the same. No, Alexander said flatly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have protected themselves first. That's human nature. But you didn't even think about it, did you? Grace shook her head slowly. He's a child. There wasn't time to think. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a crack in the controlled facade. You could have been seriously hurt. But I wasn't, Grace pointed out, forcing herself to take a deep breath, trying to slow her racing heart. And neither was Ethan. That's what matters. Ethan lifted his head from his father's shoulder, his tear-stained face turning toward Grace. Thank you, he whispered. The simple words, delivered with such sincerity by such a small person, broke something inside Grace. Tears she'd been holding back started to fall, and she quickly wiped at them with shaking hands. You're welcome, sweetheart. The sound of sirens filled the air outside, growing closer. Alexander's expression tightened. Marcus, handle the police. Standard protocol. He looked down at Grace. You'll need to give a statement. What do I say? Grace asked, suddenly afraid. She didn't understand this world, didn't know the rules. The truth, Alexander said simply. Men came in, there was a disturbance, you protected a child. That's all you know. But that's all you know, he repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. Do you understand? Grace nodded slowly. She understood more than he probably realized. She understood that she'd just seen something she shouldn't have, that she'd become involved in something dangerous, that her simple life had just become incredibly complicated. 2 police officers entered the diner, and Grace watched as Alexander transformed. The dangerous edge disappeared, replaced by the mask of a concerned father. He spoke to the officers with calm authority, explaining that his son had been having breakfast with his nanny when some kind of disturbance had occurred. Yes, his security team had responded. No, his son was unharmed, thanks to the brave young woman who'd protected him. Grace gave her statement in a daze, her words mechanical. Yes, she'd seen men enter. Yes, there'd been shouting. No, she hadn't seen anything specific. She just reacted when she saw a child in danger. It was instinct. The officer taking her statement was kind, but Grace could see the calculation in his eyes. He knew who Alexander Romano was. Everyone did, even if they didn't say it out loud. "You did a good thing," the officer finally said, closing his notebook. "A brave thing." Grace wasn't sure if it was brave or stupid, but she nodded anyway. As the police continued their work documenting the scene, interviewing witnesses, Grace stood off to the side, still shaking. Rosie came over and wrapped a thin arm around her shoulders. "You okay, kiddo?" the older woman asked quietly. "I don't know," Grace admitted. "I don't know what just happened." "You saved a little boy," Rosie said firmly. "That's what happened. Everything else." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Everything else is complicated." That was an understatement. Alexander approached them, Ethan still in his arms, though the boy had calmed down considerably. "Miss Miller, I'd like to speak with you privately before I leave." Rosie squeezed Grace's shoulder and moved away, leaving them alone, or as alone as they could be in a diner full of police and witnesses. "I owe you a debt," Alexander said quietly. "One I can never fully repay. You put yourself in danger to protect my son without knowing who he was or what the situation was. That kind of courage is rare." Grace shook her head. "I didn't do it for recognition or payment. I did it because he's a child who needed help." "I know. That's what makes it remarkable." Alexander shifted Ethan in his arms. "Nevertheless, I want to offer you compensation for—" "No," Grace interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "I don't want money. I just want to forget this ever happened and go back to my life." Alexander studied her for a long moment. "I don't think that's going to be possible." The words sent a chill through Grace's veins. "What do you mean?" "What you did here today was witnessed by many people. It will be talked about. And in my world, Miss Miller, visibility can be dangerous." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm going to assign someone to keep an eye on you, for your own protection." "I don't need protection," Grace protested. "Perhaps not," Alexander agreed. "But I need peace of mind that the woman who saved my son's life stays safe. Consider it a favor to me." It didn't sound like a request, and Grace realized with growing unease that she didn't have much choice in the matter. She'd stepped into Alexander Romano's world the moment she'd thrown herself over Ethan, and stepping back out wasn't going to be simple. "Grace," Ethan said suddenly, his voice small. "Will I see you again?" Grace's heart clenched. She looked into the boy's hopeful eyes and couldn't bring herself to lie. "I don't know, honey. I want to see you again," Ethan said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "You're nice. You smell like pancakes." Despite everything, Grace laughed. A short, slightly hysterical sound. "I work in a diner. I always smell like pancakes. Can she come to our house, Daddy?" Ethan asked, turning to his father with renewed energy. "Please?" Alexander's expression was unreadable. "We'll see, son. Right now, we need to get you home and make sure you're really okay." He looked at Grace one more time, and she felt the weight of that gaze. "Someone will be in touch, Miss Miller. Please don't be alarmed. They're there to help." Before Grace could respond, Alexander was moving toward the door, his security team falling into formation around him and Ethan. She watched them leave, the black SUVs pulling away with smooth efficiency, and felt as if she'd just been caught in a riptide, pulled under by forces she didn't understand and couldn't control. Rosie appeared at her side again. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get you some water and sit down for a minute." Grace nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to an undamaged booth. Her hands were still shaking, and she couldn't seem to get warm despite the diner's stuffy heat. "What have I done?" she whispered. Rosie patted her hand. "You did what your heart told you to do. Can't ever be wrong to protect a child." But as Grace sat there, watching the police finish their work and the diner slowly return to some semblance of normalcy, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded. Customers would return. The diner would be cleaned and repaired. Life would go on. But for Grace Miller, nothing would ever be quite the same again. She'd thrown herself over a crying boy as danger surrounded them, and in doing so, she'd caught the attention of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Alexander Romano had told her that visibility could be dangerous in his world. Grace was about to learn just how dangerous it could be. Grace stared at the ceiling of her small studio apartment, watching shadows from the street lamp outside dance across the cracked plaster. Sleep wouldn't come. It hadn't come easily since that morning at Rosie's diner. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back under that table, her body covering Ethan's, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. The sounds were the worst part. In her dreams, the shouting was louder, the chaos more intense. She'd wake up gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat, her hands trembling just as they had that day. Grace rolled onto her side, pulling her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. The October chill had crept into Chicago with a vengeance, and her ancient radiator could barely keep up. She'd meant to ask her landlord about it, but lately, she couldn't seem to focus on normal problems. Everything felt distant, muted, like she was experiencing life from behind a thick pane of glass. Her phone screen illuminated the darkness. 12:03 a.m. She had to be up in 5 hours for the morning shift. Rosie had insisted she take a week off after the incident, but Grace had returned after only 3 days. She needed the routine, needed the distraction, needed to feel normal again. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Grace had noticed them on the third day, the people watching her. At first, she thought it was paranoia, a side effect of the trauma. But the black sedan that appeared on her street at odd hours was too consistent to be a coincidence. The man in the coffee shop who seemed to be reading the same page of his newspaper for 45 minutes. The woman who'd gotten on the bus with Grace 3 days in a row, always standing near the back door, always watching. Alexander had said he would assign someone to watch over her. But these people didn't feel like protection. They felt like predators circling their prey. Grace finally gave up on sleep around 2 a.m. She made herself chamomile tea, the cheap kind from the corner store, not the fancy organic stuff she couldn't afford, and sat by her window, watching the empty street below. Chicago at night had always made her feel small but safe, anonymous in the sprawling urban landscape. Now it just made her feel exposed. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone in Pilsen, a neighborhood where street art covered brick walls, and the smell of tamales from corner vendors mixed with exhaust fumes. She'd loved it when she first moved in, the diversity, the energy, the sense of community. Now, she jumped at every sound in the hallway, every car door slamming outside. The tea grew cold in her hands as dawn finally broke over the city skyline. Pink and orange streaks painted the sky, and Grace watched the transformation with hollow appreciation. Beautiful things still existed. The world kept turning. Life went on. She just wasn't sure how to be a part of it anymore. The diner had been repaired quickly. New windows installed, damaged furniture replaced, everything cleaned and sanitized. But Grace could still see the chaos when she looked at booth 7. Could still feel the worn linoleum under her knees as she'd covered Ethan's small body with her own. "Order up, Tommy," called from the kitchen, his booming voice cutting through her thoughts. Grace shook herself and grabbed the plates, 2 stacks of pancakes, extra bacon, hash browns. She delivered them to table 4 with her practiced smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. "You okay, honey?" Mrs. Chun, one of the regulars, asked with genuine concern. "You look tired." "Just didn't sleep well," Grace said, which was true enough. "Can I get you anything else? Maybe you should take some time off," Mrs. Chun suggested gently. "After what happened?" "I'm fine," Grace interrupted, more sharply than she'd intended. She softened her tone. "Really, I'm okay. Work helps." Mrs. Chun didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. Grace moved away, refilling coffee cups on autopilot, taking orders she barely heard, her mind elsewhere. She was pouring coffee for table 8 when she felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of her neck that meant someone was watching her. Grace turned slowly and froze. Alexander Romano sat in booth 3, looking completely out of place in his dark suit and expensive watch. He wasn't alone. 2 men Grace recognized from that day stood near the door, their presence subtle but unmistakable. They weren't customers. They were guards. Grace's hand trembled slightly, and coffee splashed onto the saucer. She set the pot down carefully and walked over to him, very aware that every eye in the diner was now tracking her movement. "Mr. Romano," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "What are you doing here?" "Having breakfast," Alexander replied calmly, gesturing to the menu in front of him. "I hear the pancakes are exceptional. You don't strike me as a pancakes kind of guy." "Me as a pancake person." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "You'd be surprised what I enjoy, Miss Miller. May I have coffee?" Grace located a clean mug and poured, acutely aware of his dark eyes following her every movement. "How's Ethan?" "He's well. He asks about you frequently." Alexander wrapped his hands around the mug, and Grace noticed the scars on his knuckles, faint and old, hinting at a tougher past than his current polished appearance suggested. "That's actually why I'm here, to tell me about Ethan? To thank you properly." Alexander reached into his jacket pocket, and Grace tensed involuntarily. He noticed, and his movements became deliberately slow as he withdrew an envelope. "And to offer compensation for your bravery." Grace stared at the envelope as he placed it on the table between them. It was thick, cream-colored, expensive-looking. "I told you I don't want money. It's not charity, Miss Miller. You were traumatized while protecting my son. The least I can do is ensure you have the resources to process that trauma. Therapy, time off work, whatever you need." "I don't need anything from you," Grace said, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was she'd looked into therapy after the incident. Her community college offered counseling services, but the waiting list was 3 months long. Private therapy cost money she simply didn't have. "You're having nightmares," Alexander said, and it wasn't a question. Grace's eyes snapped to his. "How would you know that?" "Because I've had them too. After traumatic events, it's normal. But normal doesn't mean you should suffer through it alone." He pushed the envelope closer. "There's a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chun, excellent credentials, specializes in trauma. I've already arranged for you to see her. No cost, no strings attached. Her information is in here, along with enough to cover any time you need away from work." Grace's pride warred with her desperation. She was exhausted, jumpy, barely functional. The thought of professional help was tempting, so tempting, but accepting it from Alexander Romano felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "Why do you care?" she asked bluntly. "You don't know me. You threw yourself over my son," Alexander said, his voice low but intense. "Without hesitation, without knowing who he was, without considering the cost to yourself. That kind of selflessness is rare, Miss Miller. Rare enough that I want to ensure it doesn't destroy you." The sincerity in his voice caught Grace off guard. She'd expected arrogance, perhaps condescension, the attitude of a powerful man used to buying solutions to problems. But this was something else, genuine gratitude mixed with what might have been respect. "I can't accept this," Grace said finally, though she didn't push the envelope back. "Can't or won't? Both, neither. I don't know." Grace rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar pressure of an impending headache. "This isn't my world, Mr. Romano. I don't understand the rules, and I don't want to owe anyone anything." "You don't owe me. I owe you." Alexander leaned back against the booth, studying her with those unervingly perceptive eyes. "But I understand your hesitation. So, let me make you a deal. Take the therapist's information. Go see her once. If you don't find it helpful, you owe nothing. If you do, consider it my way of saying thank you for giving my son back to me unharmed." Grace wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to maintain distance, to keep her life separate from whatever complicated world Alexander inhabited. But the exhaustion was winning. The nightmares were winning. The fear that followed her through every day was winning. "One session," she heard herself say. "Just one." Alexander nodded, seeming satisfied. "That's all I ask." He stood, leaving money for coffee he hadn't drunk. and Grace noticed how the entire diner seemed to release a collective breath as he moved toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "Miss Miller, one more thing. Have you noticed anyone following you?" Grace's blood ran cold. "How did you?" "Because I have people watching you, too, and they've reported seeing others." "Not my people." His expression hardened. "If anyone approaches you, anyone makes you feel unsafe, you call this number immediately." He placed a business card next to the envelope. Heavy cardstock, embossed letters, a single phone number, no name, no title. "Who would be following me?" Grace asked, though she dreaded the answer. "People who might see your connection to my son as leverage," Alexander said carefully. "It's being handled, but I need you to be cautious, aware of your surroundings. Trust your instincts." "You're scaring me." "Good. Fear keeps you alert. Just don't let it paralyze you." He gestured to the card. "Call if you need anything, day or night." Then he was gone, his guards following like shadows. And Grace was left standing in the middle of Rosie's diner, holding an envelope full of money and a phone number that felt like a lifeline and a trap all at once. Grace stood in the doorway of her apartment, staring at the interior with mounting dread. The space looked the same as when she'd left that morning. Her bed was still unmade. Her small kitchen still had dishes in the sink. Her second-hand furniture arranged exactly as it had been. But something was wrong. The books on her shelf were slightly askew, as if someone had pulled them out and replaced them carelessly. Her closet door, which she always kept closed, stood slightly ajar. The bathroom cabinet, had she left it open that morning? Grace's heart raced as she stepped fully inside, closing and locking the door behind her. She moved through the apartment systematically, checking everything. Nothing appeared to be missing. Her laptop was still on the desk, her small jewelry box untouched. The $40 in emergency cash she kept in a coffee can still there. But someone had been here. She was certain of it. Grace grabbed her phone with shaking hands and pulled out Alexander's business card. She stared at it for a long moment, pride warring with fear. Calling him would mean admitting she needed help, would mean pulling herself deeper into his orbit. The decision was made when she noticed her journal. The cheap spiral notebook where she wrote her thoughts before bed was sitting on her nightstand. She always kept it in the drawer. Always. Someone had read her journal, had been in her most private space, touched her most personal thoughts. Grace dialed the number. Alexander answered on the second ring. "Miss Miller, someone was in my apartment," Grace said without preamble, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I don't think they took anything, but they were here. They went through my things." "Are you there now?" His voice was sharp, focused. "Yes, I just got home." "Leave now. Don't pack anything. Don't wait. Just leave the apartment and go somewhere public, a coffee shop, a store, anywhere with people. Do you understand?" "But now, Grace." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the urgency in his tone propelled her into action. Grace grabbed her purse and fled her apartment, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She burst out onto the street, the cool evening air hitting her face as she looked around wildly. Where should she go? The corner store was 2 blocks away, always busy this time of night. She started walking fast, then jogging, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with fear. Behind her, she heard footsteps matching her pace. Grace turned onto a busier street, relief flooding through her as she saw other people. A couple walking their dog, a group of teenagers laughing outside a taqueria, an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk in front of his shop. She ducked into a brightly lit coffee shop called the Daily Grind, practically falling through the door. The barista looked up in surprise. "You okay, miss?" Grace nodded, not trusting her voice, and ordered the first thing she saw on the menu. A latte she didn't want. She found a table near the window where she could watch the street and sat down. Her hands wrapped around her phone like a lifeline. It rang 3 minutes later. "Alexander, I'm at a coffee shop on 18th Street, Grace said immediately. "The Daily Grind. I know. My people are outside. They'll stay with you until I arrive." "You're coming here? Did you think I wouldn't?" There was something almost offended in his tone. You called me because you were afraid. That makes it my responsibility to ensure you're safe. Grace wanted to argue that she wasn't his responsibility, that she'd managed to take care of herself for 23 years without his help. But the words died in her throat because, right now, in this moment, she was grateful someone was coming. Okay, she whispered. 20 minutes, Alexander promised. Stay where you are. Stay visible. You're safe, Grace. The line went dead, and Grace set her phone on the table, her latte cooling in front of her, untouched. Through the window, she could see a dark sedan parked across the street, and though she couldn't make out the faces inside, she knew they were Alexander's people, the ones watching over her. For the first time since she'd returned to her violated apartment, Grace felt like she could breathe. Alexander arrived in 18 minutes, not 20, flanked by the same two men who'd been at the diner that morning. He scanned the coffee shop with a practiced eye before his gaze landed on Grace, and she saw the tension in his shoulders ease fractionally. He approached her table alone, his guards taking positions near the entrance. "May I sit?" Grace nodded, and he slid into the chair across from her with surprising grace for a man his size. Up close, she could see the concern in his dark eyes, the tight set of his jaw. "Tell me exactly what you noticed," he said without preamble. Grace detailed everything, the books, the closet, the journal. Alexander listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his expression growing darker with each detail. "They wanted you to know they'd been there," he said finally. "This wasn't about theft. It was about intimidation." "Who?" Grace asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "The Castellaniano family. They control territory on the south side, and they've been looking for leverage against me for months." Alexander's hands clenched into fists on the table. "They saw what you did for Ethan, and now they think you matter to me." "But I don't," Grace protested. "We barely know each other." "That's not how they see it. You saved my son's life. In their world, that creates a bond, a connection they can exploit." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "Grace, I need to be honest with you. This situation is more complicated than I initially anticipated. The break-in at your apartment is just the beginning. They're going to keep pushing, keep testing to see if you're truly under my protection." "And am I?" Grace asked quietly. "Under your protection?" Alexander met her eyes. "If you want to be, but that comes with conditions. You'd need to let my people stay close. You'd need to follow security protocols. Your freedom would be restricted, like a prisoner, like someone whose safety I consider a priority." He leaned forward slightly. "I won't lie to you and say this is ideal. It's not. But the alternative is leaving you vulnerable to people who have no qualms about using innocent civilians to achieve their goals." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, tears of frustration, fear, exhaustion. "I just wanted to help a little boy, that's all. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know." Alexander's voice softened. "And if I could undo it, keep you separate from my world, I would. But we're past that point now. The question is, what do we do moving forward?" "I don't know," Grace admitted. "I can't afford to move. I can't quit my job. I barely make rent as it is. I don't have options, Mr. Romano." "Alexander," he corrected. "And you have more options than you think. For starters, you're not going back to that apartment tonight. I've already arranged accommodations at a hotel. Somewhere secure, somewhere safe. Your things will be collected and brought to you." "I can't afford a hotel." "You're not paying for it. I am." He held up a hand to forestall her protest. "This isn't charity, Grace. This is me fixing a problem I created by allowing my son to be in a public place where he could become a target. You became collateral damage, and I take responsibility for that." Grace wanted to argue, but she was so tired of being afraid, tired of jumping at shadows, tired of pretending she could handle this alone. "What happens tomorrow, next week? I can't live in a hotel forever." "No, but you can stay somewhere safe while we resolve the situation with the Castellanos. A few weeks, maybe a month." "And my job, my classes?" Grace felt her carefully constructed life crumbling. I'm 8 credits away from my degree, Alexander. I can't just put my life on hold. You can take classes online. As for work, he paused. Rosie's isn't safe for you right now, too public, too predictable. But if you need income, I can arrange something. Doing what? I'm a waitress and a student. Those are my skills. Alexander's expression shifted, and Grace saw him arrive at a decision. Ethan needs a tutor. His nanny is excellent, but she's not equipped to help with his schoolwork. He's bright, but he's behind in reading, and his teacher recommended additional support. You're studying early childhood education. You'd be perfect. Grace stared at him. You want me to tutor your son? I want to employ you in a legitimate capacity that keeps you in a secure environment while utilizing your actual skills. Ethan adores you. You'd be helping him while helping yourself. Everyone benefits. It was logical, even sensible. But Grace couldn't shake the feeling that accepting would tie her irrevocably to Alexander's world in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until morning, Alexander replied. For tonight, let me at least get you somewhere safe. No strings attached. Just a room where you can sleep without fear. Can you agree to that much? Grace nodded slowly. What choice did she have? Her apartment was compromised. She had nowhere else to go. And despite everything, despite the danger and complication, she trusted that Alexander Romano would keep his word about her safety. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The room Alexander had secured was nicer than anywhere Grace had ever stayed. King-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, a marble bathroom with a soaking tub, a view of the Chicago skyline that took her breath away. It felt surreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Her laptop and a few essential items had been delivered while she waited in the hotel lobby, collected by Alexander's people from her apartment with unsettling efficiency. She sat on the bed now, laptop open, trying to focus on homework, but finding her mind wandering. A knock at the door startled her. Grace checked the peephole and saw a woman in a hotel uniform holding something. She opened the door cautiously. Delivery for Miss Miller, the woman said cheerfully, holding out a package. Compliments of Mr. Romano. Grace accepted it with confusion and closed the door. Inside the package was a soft cotton pajama set, far nicer than anything she owned, and a note in neat handwriting. Thought you might need these. Rest well. Despite everything, Grace smiled. It was a thoughtful gesture, practical and kind without being presumptuous. She changed into the pajamas, which fit perfectly, and climbed into the impossibly comfortable bed. For the first time in 2 weeks, Grace fell asleep within minutes, lulled by the knowledge that someone was standing guard, that she was safe, that she could stop being afraid for just one night. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the previous day came flooding back. On the desk, she found a tray with breakfast, fresh fruit, croissants, orange juice, and excellent coffee. Another note, eat, then we'll talk. Grace ate mechanically, her mind spinning. She couldn't keep living like this, displaced and dependent. She needed to make a decision. Her phone rang. Alexander, did you sleep? He asked. Better than I have in weeks, Grace admitted. Thank you for all of this. You're welcome. Have you thought about my offer about tutoring Ethan? Grace took a deep breath. Can I meet with him first before I decide? I'd need to see if we work well together, if he actually needs what I can offer. That's fair. Alexander sounded pleased. Are you free this afternoon? I can arrange for you to come to the house, meet Ethan properly, see the space where you'd be working. Okay, Grace said, committing before she could overthink it. What time? 2 o'clock. Car will pick you up. After they hung up, Grace stood by the window, looking out at Chicago spread beneath her. Somewhere in this vast city, people were living normal lives, going to work, taking classes, worrying about ordinary problems. Grace had stopped being one of those people the moment she'd thrown herself over Ethan Romano. Now she had to decide if she was going to fight to reclaim that normality or accept that her life had fundamentally changed. She had 4 hours to figure out which path to choose. The car that picked up Grace from the hotel was a sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver who spoke only to confirm her identity before maintaining professional silence. As they left downtown Chicago and headed north along Lakeshore Drive, Grace watched the city transform from urban density to suburban elegance. Lake Forest was a world away from her Pilsen apartment, tree-lined streets with sprawling estates hidden behind iron gates and manicured hedges. Old money and new power existed side by side here, and Grace felt increasingly out of place in her simple jeans and cardigan. The Romano estate appeared after they turned down a private road. Grace's breath caught as they approached. It was beautiful in an understated way. A 3-story Georgian-style mansion in cream-colored stone with dark shutters and ivy climbing the eastern wall. The grounds were expansive but not ostentatious, with mature oak trees providing shade and privacy. Security was present but subtle. Cameras at strategic points, a gatehouse that looked more like a charming cottage. Men in suits were positioned around the property, who might have been landscapers if not for the way their eyes tracked the car's approach. The Mercedes pulled up to the circular driveway, and before Grace could gather her courage, the front door opened. Ethan Romano burst out, his face lighting up with pure joy. "Grace, you came." He ran down the steps, his small legs pumping with excitement. Grace stepped out of the car, and Ethan crashed into her with the force of a happy 6-year-old, wrapping his arms around her waist. The spontaneous affection caught her off guard, and she felt tears prick her eyes as she hugged him back. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "Of course I came." "Ethan, let Miss Grace breathe." A woman's voice called from the doorway. Grace looked up to see an older woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. This must be the nanny Alexander had mentioned. "I'm Margaret," the woman said, descending the steps with more dignity than Ethan had managed. "It's lovely to finally meet you properly. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about you since the incident at the diner." Grace shook her hand, appreciating the firm grip and genuine warmth. "It's nice to meet you, too. Daddy's in his office, but he said to give you a tour first," Ethan announced, grabbing Grace's hand and tugging her toward the door. "Come on. I want to show you everything." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings with crown molding, hardwood floors covered with expensive rugs, artwork that looked original rather than mass-produced. But what struck Grace most was how it felt like a home rather than a showpiece. There were Ethan's drawings on the refrigerator, books scattered on side tables, a jacket tossed over a chair in the hallway. Ethan gave her an enthusiastic tour, pointing out his favorite rooms with the excitement of a child who rarely had visitors. The library impressed Grace most. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books, comfortable chairs near a fireplace, windows overlooking the back gardens. "Daddy reads to me here every night," Ethan said proudly. "Well, almost every night. Sometimes he has to work late." The wistfulness in his voice tugged at Grace's heart. She knelt down to his level. "What's your favorite book?" Ethan's face brightened. "Where the Wild Things Are. Do you know it?" "It's one of my favorites, too," Grace said honestly. "Max is very brave, isn't he?" "Like you," Ethan said with childlike certainty. "You were brave when you saved me." Before Grace could respond, a deep voice spoke from the doorway. "He's right. You were incredibly brave." Alexander Romano stood in the library entrance, dressed more casually than she'd seen him before. Dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked less like a powerful businessman and more like a father, and the transformation was startling. "Daddy!" Ethan ran to his father, who scooped him up easily despite the boy's size. "Did you finish your work? Can Grace stay for dinner?" "Let's not overwhelm her," Alexander said with amusement. "She's here to see if tutoring you would be something she's interested in. Remember what we talked about?" Ethan nodded. "Seriously, I have to be a good student and show her my schoolwork." "Exactly." Alexander set his son down and looked at Grace. "Thank you for coming. I know this is all rather unconventional." "That's one word for it," Grace said, managing a small smile. Over the next hour, Grace reviewed Ethan's schoolwork with him in the bright, spacious room that served as his study area. Margaret brought them lemonade and cookies, and Grace was impressed by how the household ran. Organized but not rigid, comfortable but not chaotic. Ethan was indeed bright, as Alexander had said, but his reading skills lagged behind his comprehension. He could understand complex concepts when they were explained to him but struggled to decode written words. Grace recognized the signs, possible dyslexia or another learning difference that had gone undiagnosed. "You know what I think, Ethan?" Grace said after listening to him struggle through a paragraph. "I think your brain works in a really special way. You're super smart, but reading might always be a little trickier for you than other things, and that's okay. There are lots of ways to be smart." Ethan looked at her with hope. "Really? My teacher says I need to try harder." Grace felt a flash of anger at the teacher but kept her voice gentle. "Trying hard is important, but so is finding the right way to learn. If I work with, okay, we'll figure out what works best for your brain. Deal?" "Deal." Ethan's smile was absolutely radiant. After the tutoring session, Margaret took Ethan to wash up for snack time, leaving Grace alone with Alexander in his study. The room exuded a masculine elegance. It was furnished with leather and dark wood, but also had a surprisingly personal touch. Photos of Ethan at various ages adorned one wall, and Grace noticed that none of them included a woman who might have been his mother. "He likes you," Alexander remarked, pouring 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher. "More importantly, you understand him. You immediately saw his learning challenges. Has he been evaluated for dyslexia or other processing differences?" Grace asked, accepting the glass. "His school suggested it, but I've been resistant." Alexander sat in the chair across from her, suddenly looking tired. "I didn't want him labeled, limited by other people's expectations." "Labels aren't limitations if they lead to the right support," Grace said carefully. "Ethan is incredibly bright, Alexander. With the right approach, he could excel. But he needs someone who understands that his brain works differently. Not wrong, just differently." Alexander studied her for a long moment. "You really are studying to be a teacher." "Was," Grace corrected quietly. "I had to drop my classes this semester. After everything that happened, I couldn't focus, and I couldn't afford to fail. I was planning to re-enroll next semester, but..." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the complicated situation her life had become. "What if you didn't have to wait?" Alexander leaned forward. "Work with Ethan 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 4 hours each day. That gives you Tuesday and Thursday for online classes. If you re-enroll, I'll cover your tuition." "I can't let you do that," Grace protested automatically. "Why not? You'd be providing a valuable service. Ethan needs you, Grace. I can hire any number of tutors with impressive credentials, but credentials don't matter if they don't connect with the child. You connect with him. He trusts you. That's worth far more than any degree." Grace wanted to argue, but the offer was incredibly tempting, way too tempting. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that you'd need to work here at the estate. It's the only place I can guarantee your security right now." Alexander's expression grew serious. "The situation with the Castanos hasn't improved. If anything, it's escalated. They know you've been staying at the hotel. They know you came here today. They're watching, waiting for an opportunity." "An opportunity to do what?" "To use you against me," Alexander said bluntly. "They believe you matter to me because you saved Ethan. They think taking you would give them leverage." "But I don't matter to you," Grace said, though even as she spoke, she wondered if it was entirely true. "We barely know each other. That's semantics to them. You're connected to my son. Therefore, you're connected to me." He paused. "And, for what it's worth, you do matter. Anyone brave enough to shield a child from danger matters. Your safety has become important to me." Whether she understood it or not, Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks at the intensity in his voice. She looked away, focusing on a photo of young Ethan on the wall. "If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I am, what would it look like? I can't just move in here." "Why not?" Because Grace struggled to articulate the boundary she felt crumbling. "Because that would be crossing a line. I'd be in your home, in your life, in your space. That's too much, too fast, too complicated. You wouldn't be in my space, Alexander clarified. The estate has a guest house, 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, completely private. You'd have your own entrance, your own life. You'd just be on the property, safe for how long? Until the situation resolves. A few weeks, maybe a month or 2. And if it doesn't resolve? Grace challenged. What if this is permanent? What if being connected to you means always looking over my shoulder, always being afraid? Alexander's jaw tightened. Then I'll give you a way out. New identity, relocation to another city, enough money to start over. I won't let you be trapped in my world indefinitely if you don't want to be. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Grace realized that Alexander Romano, for all his power and reputation, was genuinely trying to do right by her. The knowledge shifted something in her perception of him. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course. Take the evening. I'll have you driven back to the hotel, and you can call me tomorrow with your decision. But before Grace could stand, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face anxious. Are you leaving already? You just got here. I need to go back to the hotel, sweetie, Grace said gently. But you're coming back, right? Ethan's lower lip trembled. You're going to be my tutor. Grace looked at Alexander helplessly, not wanting to make promises she might not keep. He recognized her dilemma and intervened. Grace needs to think about it, son. It's a big decision. But I want her to stay, Ethan said, his voice rising with emotion. She's nice, and she smells like pancakes, and she makes me feel safe. The last words hit Grace like a physical blow. Asterisk, she makes me feel safe. Asterisk, this child who'd been through trauma, who'd lost his mother, who lived in a world of guards and security. He felt safe with her. Grace knelt down and pulled Ethan into a hug. Hey, listen to me. Whether I'm your tutor or not, you're going to be okay. You're so brave and so smart, and you have people who love you very much. But I want you, Ethan whispered against her shoulder. Grace met Alexander's eyes over Ethan's head and saw her own turmoil reflected there. This wasn't just about a job or security anymore. This was about a little boy who needed stability, who'd attached himself to her with the fierce loyalty of a child seeking safe harbor. Let me think about it, Grace said softly to Ethan. Can you give me until tomorrow? Ethan nodded reluctantly, and Grace stood, her heart aching. As Margaret gently led Ethan away for his afternoon activities, Grace and Alexander remained in the study, the weight of unspoken things hanging between them. He doesn't get attached easily, Alexander said quietly. Since his mother passed, he's been cautious, withdrawn. But with you he's different, open, hopeful. What happened to her? Grace asked, then immediately regretted the intrusion. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. It's a fair question. Alexander moved to the window, his back to her. Elena died 3 years ago. Complications during a routine medical procedure. One day she was fine. He stopped, his shoulders tense. Ethan was only 3. Too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the loss. I'm so sorry, Grace said, meaning it. He needs positive influences in his life. People who aren't part of my world, who can show him there's more to life than business and security and watching your back. Alexander turned to face her. People like you. You don't know what kind of person I am, Grace said. You don't know where I came from or what I've been through. Then tell me. The invitation hung in the air. Grace had spent years building walls around her past, keeping it separate from her present. But something about this moment, this room, this man who'd shown her more genuine concern than most people in her life, it made her want to be honest. I ran away from home when I was 17, Grace heard herself say. My stepfather was difficult. My mother wouldn't leave him, wouldn't protect me, so I left instead. Took a bus to Chicago with $200 and a backpack full of clothes. Alexander listened without interruption. His dark eyes focused entirely on her. I lived in a shelter for 6 months while I finished high school online. Got my GED, worked 3 part-time jobs. Saved every penny. When I turned 18, I rented a room in a house with 5 other people. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Safe. That takes remarkable strength, Alexander said quietly. It takes desperation, Grace corrected. I was desperate to survive, to build something better. I enrolled in community college because I remembered my fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson. She was the only adult who ever made me feel like I mattered. I want to be that for other kids. I want to be the person who notices when a child is struggling, who makes them feel safe. Like you did for Ethan. Like I did for Ethan, Grace agreed. I didn't think about it. I just saw a scared little boy, and I couldn't not help him. This is who I am. I know. That's why you're perfect for this. Not just as a tutor, but as someone who understands what it means to fight for a better life. Ethan needs to see that resilience, that determination. Grace felt the walls crumbling further. What if I can't give him what he needs? What if I'm not enough? You are enough, Alexander said with conviction. You've always been enough, Grace. You just need to believe it. The vulnerability of the moment was broken by Grace's phone buzzing. She glanced at it and froze. Unknown number. A text message with a photo attached. Her hands started shaking as she opened it. The photo was of her, taken today as she'd gotten into the Mercedes outside the hotel. The message below read, "Nice car. Enjoy the luxury while you can." Alexander saw her expression change. What is it? Wordlessly, Grace handed him the phone. His face darkened as he read the message, and he immediately pulled out his own phone. "Marcus, get up here now," he said curtly. "We have a problem." Within minutes, 3 men appeared in the study. Alexander showed them Grace's phone, and they began discussing security protocols in clipped, professional tones. Grace felt like she was floating above the scene, watching it happen to someone else. This was real. The danger was real. These weren't vague threats. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements, making sure she knew it. "Grace." Alexander's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Look at me." She focused on his face, using it as an anchor. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "This message was designed to scare you, to make you feel vulnerable. Don't give them that power." "They know where I am," Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're watching. And so am I," Alexander countered. "So are 20 trained professionals whose job is to keep this property secure. They can send messages. They can try to intimidate, but they cannot touch you here." Marcus, one of Alexander's security team, stepped forward. "Miss Miller, we're going to trace this number and increase surveillance on all entry points to the property. Your phone will be secured against further unwanted contact. You're safe. Safe." Everyone kept saying she was safe, but Grace didn't feel safe. She felt trapped, cornered, like prey being circled by predators she couldn't see. "I want to go back to the hotel," she said suddenly, standing. "I need to think. I can't think here." "Grace," Alexander began. "Please." She cut him off, desperation creeping into her voice. "I just need space. Just for tonight. Tomorrow I'll give you my answer, but right now I need to be alone." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but you're not going back to the hotel. It's been compromised. That's how they got today's photo. Marcus will take you to a different location, somewhere secure that they don't know about." "Okay," Grace agreed, too overwhelmed to argue. The drive to the new location, a corporate apartment in a high-security building downtown, passed in a blur. Marcus was professional and kind, explaining the building's security features, showing her how to use the special access codes, making sure she had everything she needed. But once he left and Grace was alone in the sterile, modern apartment, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. She couldn't go back to her old life. Her apartment wasn't safe. Her job wasn't safe. The simple existence she'd fought so hard to build had been shattered the moment she'd thrown herself over Ethan Romano. Grace sank onto the expensive leather couch and let herself cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of pure exhaustion and fear and grief for the life she'd lost. Her phone rang around 8 p.m. "Alexander. Are you okay?" he asked without preamble. "No," Grace said honestly. "I'm really not. Do you want me to come there?" Yes, she thought. Asterisk, I want someone to tell me this will all be okay. Asterisk, but she said, no. I need to figure this out on my own. Grace, there's something I need to tell you. Alexander's voice was serious. I spoke with some people after you left. We can end this. End what? The threat from the Castanos. I can arrange for you to disappear. New identity, new city, complete fresh start. Full financial support for as long as you need it. You could finish your degree anywhere in the country. Live without fear, be free. The offer should have been tempting. Should have been exactly what she wanted. But Grace found herself asking, what about Ethan? He would understand eventually. Would he? Grace challenged. Or would he just feel abandoned by another person he'd grown attached to? Silence on the other end of the line. You're asking me to choose, Grace said slowly, working through the realization as she spoke. Stay and help Ethan, but live with restrictions and danger. Or leave and be free, but abandon a little boy who needs me. I'm not asking you to choose, Alexander said quietly. I'm giving you options. There's no wrong answer here, Grace. But there was. Grace knew there was because the moment Ethan had said, she makes me feel safe, the choice had already been made. I'm staying, Grace said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. I'll take the tutoring position. I'll stay at the guest house. I'll follow your security protocols, but I have conditions. Name them. I continue my online classes. I maintain my independence as much as possible, and you're honest with me about the dangers, about the situation, about everything. No protecting me from the truth. Agreed, Alexander said immediately. Anything else? Yes. Grace took a deep breath. I want to help Ethan, not just with schoolwork, but with processing his trauma. What happened at the diner affected him, too. He needs support, maybe counseling. I want to make sure he gets it. I'll arrange it. There was something in Alexander's voice. Respect, maybe gratitude. Thank you, Grace. Don't thank me yet, Grace said. I have no idea what I'm doing. None of us do, Alexander replied. We're all just trying to do our best with impossible situations. After they hung up, Grace stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Chicago's glittering skyline. Somewhere in this city, people were making her life dangerous. Somewhere in Lake Forest, a little boy was probably being tucked into bed, maybe wondering if she'd come back. Grace thought about Mrs. Patterson, her fourth-grade teacher. The woman who'd noticed a quiet, sad girl and had made her feel seen. The woman who'd inspired Grace to want to help children herself. Mrs. Patterson had once told her, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay when every instinct tells you to run. Grace pressed her hand against the cool glass and made a promise to herself, to Ethan, to the scared girl she'd once been who'd needed someone to stay. She would be brave. She would stay. And somehow she would make this work. Tomorrow her new life would begin. Grace had settled into an unexpected rhythm at the Romano estate. The guest house became her sanctuary, cozy and private with a view of the gardens. 3 days a week, she worked with Ethan, watching him blossom under her patient guidance. His reading improved steadily once they found strategies that worked with his learning style rather than against it. What surprised Grace most was how natural it all felt. Ethan's laughter as they played educational games, Margaret's warm presence and motherly advice, even Alexander's occasional appearances in the study, observing lessons with quiet approval. But the elephant in the room was growing harder to ignore. Alexander had started joining them for dinner twice a week, casual family meals that felt dangerously domestic. Grace found herself looking forward to his arrival, watching for his car in the driveway, her heart doing an inconvenient flutter when he smiled at something Ethan said. Miss Grace is the best teacher ever, Ethan announced one evening over pasta. Right, Daddy? She certainly is. Alexander agreed, his dark eyes meeting Grace's across the table with an intensity that made her breath catch. Later, after Ethan was in bed, Alexander found Grace in the library. She was curling up with a book, trying to focus on her online coursework. May I? He asked, gesturing to the chair beside her. Grace nodded, hyper-aware of his proximity as he sat down. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. "Grace, I need to tell you something," Alexander began, his voice lower than usual. "The situation with the Castanos. It's more complicated than I initially explained." Grace's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "There's been communication, negotiations. They're willing to back off to leave you alone." He paused, his jaw clenching. "But they want assurances that you don't mean anything to me beyond being Ethan's tutor." "I don't," Grace said automatically, though the words felt hollow. "Don't you?" Alexander's gaze was penetrating. "Because I'm finding it increasingly difficult to maintain that fiction." Grace's heart hammered. "Alexander, I know this is complicated. I know I have no right to feel this way, but, Grace, watching you with Ethan, seeing your strength and kindness, being near you." He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm saying too much." "No," Grace whispered. "You're saying what I've been trying not to think about." The admission hung between them, dangerous and honest. Alexander leaned closer, his hand reaching for hers, and Grace didn't pull away. The moment stretched, suspended in possibility, his face inches from hers. "Mr. Romano." Marcus burst into the library, his face urgent. "We have a situation. Someone breached the south perimeter." Alexander was on his feet instantly. The intimate moment shattered. "Where?" "Near the guest house. We contained it, but, sir." Marcus glanced at Grace. "They left something. A message." Grace's blood ran cold as they followed Marcus outside. On the guest house door, someone had spray-painted 2 words, "Pretty target. Get her inside the main house," Alexander commanded, his voice steel. Now the next hours were a blur of activity. Security swept the entire property. Grace was moved to a bedroom in the main house with guards stationed outside. Alexander paced like a caged tiger, barking orders, demanding answers. "How did they get through?" he demanded of his security team. "We're investigating, sir." But Marcus hesitated. "We may have an internal problem." The words hit like a physical blow. Someone on the inside was feeding information to the Castanos. Someone Alexander trusted had betrayed him. Grace watched from the doorway as Alexander processed this, saw the moment his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. This was the other side of him, the dangerous man who'd built power in a ruthless world. "Find them," Alexander said quietly. "I don't care how long it takes." Over the next 2 days, the investigation intensified. Grace barely saw Alexander, who was consumed with securing his household and identifying the traitor. Ethan sensed the tension, becoming clingy and anxious. "Is Grace leaving?" he asked his father one afternoon, his voice small. "No, son. Grace is staying right here where she's safe." But when Ethan's private school called about an assembly the next afternoon, one that required parent attendance, Grace volunteered to go with Alexander. Ethan needed normalcy, needed to see his world continuing despite the chaos. They were walking Ethan to his classroom when Grace noticed something wrong. A man near the parking lot watching them 2 intently. Another by the gymnasium entrance. Her instincts, honed by weeks of vigilance, screamed danger. "Alexander," she said quietly, gripping Ethan's hand tighter. "Something's wrong." Alexander saw it too, his body tensed, his hand moving to his phone. But before he could act, several men began converging on their position. Without thinking, Grace scooped up Ethan and ran toward the school's main office, where she knew there would be administrators and witnesses. Alexander's security detail materialized from seemingly nowhere, intercepting the men, creating a barrier. Grace didn't stop running until she reached the principal's office, bursting through the door with Ethan in her arms. "Lock down the school now." The principal, recognizing the urgency, immediately triggered the security protocol. Doors locked automatically. An alarm sounded, and Grace held Ethan close as he trembled against her. "You're okay, sweetheart. I've got you. You're safe." "Grace." Ethan's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "You saved me again." Tears streamed down Grace's face as she rocked him gently. Always, Ethan. I'll always keep you safe. When Alexander finally reached them after his team had secured the situation, his face was pale beneath his composure. He pulled both Grace and Ethan into his arms, holding them with a fierceness that spoke of fear finally released. "Thank you," he whispered against Grace's hair. "God, Grace, thank you." That evening, back at the estate with extra security posted, Alexander gathered his core team in his office. Grace was included now. No longer just the tutor, but someone integral to Ethan's safety. "The traitor has been identified," Marcus announced. "One of the perimeter guards. He's been removed and is being questioned." "The Castanos message is clear," Alexander said grimly. "They're willing to escalate to target Ethan directly. Then what do we do?" Grace asked, exhausted and afraid, but refusing to show it. Alexander looked at her with something like wonder. "We show them that you're not a weakness to exploit. You're the reason they'll never succeed." Later, alone with Ethan as she tucked him into bed, Grace stroked his hair gently. "Grace." Ethan's sleepy voice was thoughtful. "Are you going to stay forever?" Grace's heart clenched. "Do you want me to?" "Yes. You and Daddy both keep me safe. We're like a team. A team? A family?" The words Ethan didn't quite say, but Grace heard anyway. "Get some sleep, brave boy," she whispered, kissing his forehead. She found Alexander in the hallway, clearly having been waiting for her. Without words, he pulled her into his study and closed the door. "Grace, I need to know." He stopped, starting again. "Today at the school you didn't hesitate. You could have run, saved yourself, but you took Ethan and ran toward safety for both of you." "Of course I did. Grace struggled to explain. "He matters to me. You both do. And you matter to us," Alexander said fiercely. "More than I ever intended. More than is wise or safe." "Then we're all fools together," Grace said with a trembling smile. Alexander cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "I can't promise. I can't promise you a normal life, Grace," Alexander admitted somberly. "But I can promise you'll always be protected, valued, cherished." "That's enough," Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's more than enough." They stood together in the quiet study, a sanctuary amidst the storm. Two souls who'd stumbled upon something unexpected in the heart of chaos. A deep connection, unwavering trust, and the fragile, hopeful beginning of something that might blossom into love. Outside, the ever-vigilant security detail patrolled the expansive grounds, their eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Threats still lurked in the shadows, a constant reminder of the world they inhabited. But inside, in that precious moment, Grace finally grasped the true meaning of choosing to stay, of fighting for something worth protecting with every fiber of her being. She'd crossed the point of no return, fully embracing this new reality. There was no going back, and, more importantly, she didn't want to. The pivotal breakthrough that shifted the balance of power came from an unlikely source: Grace herself. During one of their regular tutoring sessions, Ethan casually mentioned his friend Sophia, whose father owned a string of restaurants scattered throughout Chicago. The name triggered a memory in Grace's mind. Alexander had mentioned that the Castellanos had business interests in the hospitality industry. One innocent conversation led to some dedicated research, which then led to the discovery of certain financial records that Marcus's team could potentially use as leverage in negotiations, Grace explained later. "You found the vital link we needed, Grace," Alexander said, his voice filled with genuine admiration as he spoke to her in his study. "The Castellanos have been cleverly laundering money through their seemingly legitimate businesses. With this damning evidence in hand, we now possess a significant negotiating advantage." The high-stakes meeting was meticulously arranged on neutral territory, a prestigious lawyer's office in the heart of downtown. Alexander arrived armed with irrefutable documentation and a carefully constructed proposal: mutual non-interference. The Castellanos would agree to leave his family alone, and, in return, he would keep their incriminating financial information strictly private and out of the public eye. During the tense negotiation, Grace anxiously waited at the estate, her nervous energy causing her to pace back and forth in the grand library. When Alexander finally returned, his expression was cautiously optimistic, a mask of relief barely concealing the weight he had been carrying. "It's done," he announced simply. "They've agreed to back off. You're no longer a target." Grace felt her knees buckle slightly with the overwhelming wave of relief that washed over her. "Is this really over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The immediate threat is over," Alexander confirmed. "However, there are no guarantees in my world, Grace. But you're as safe as I can possibly make you." The weight of those words hung heavily in the air between them, pregnant with unspoken meaning. Asterisk as safe as I can make you. Asterisk not perfectly safe. Not completely free from all danger, but protected to the absolute best of his considerable ability, his resources, and his influence. "So, what happens now?" Grace asked quietly, her eyes searching his. Alexander moved closer, his dark eyes intensely searching hers. "That depends entirely on what you want, Grace. You're free to leave, to return to your old life, as if none of this ever happened. I'll ensure you have everything you need. The completed tuition for your degree, a secure apartment in a safe neighborhood, whatever you require to rebuild your life." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And if I don't want to leave?" Grace asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then I'm asking you to stay, Grace," Alexander said, his voice suddenly thick with barely suppressed emotion. "Not just as Ethan's tutor, although I sincerely hope you'll continue in that role as well, but as a true part of our lives, a part of our family." Grace's heart raced, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic mix of hope and fear. "Alexander, I need you to understand something very clearly," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "I'm not interested in being kept or protected like some fragile, delicate thing. If I choose to stay, it's as your equal. I finish my degree. I work with Ethan because I want to, not because I owe you some debt. I maintain my own identity. I need to be me. I wouldn't want it any other way, Grace," Alexander assured her, a genuine smile gracing his lips. "You're not fragile. You're the strongest person I know. You threw yourself over my son without hesitation, protecting him with your own body. You faced terrifying threats with unwavering courage, and you've never once lost sight of who you are. That strength is part of why." He stopped, seeming to gather his courage before continuing. "Part of why I've fallen deeply in love with you." The weight of those words stole Grace's breath, leaving her momentarily speechless. She'd felt something growing between them, a powerful connection that defied logic and circumstance. But hearing him voice his feelings aloud made it undeniably real, both terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't want to. I tried not to. But somewhere between those tutoring sessions, those family dinners, and learning to trust again, I fell completely in love with both of you." Alexander gently pulled her into his arms, and Grace gratefully let herself be held, feeling an overwhelming sense of safety that had absolutely nothing to do with advanced security systems and everything to do with the genuine, unbreakable connection they had forged. "Grace," Ethan's voice called from the hallway, interrupting their tender moment. "Are you still here?" They quickly separated as Ethan burst into the library, his face lighting up with pure joy when he saw her. "You didn't leave." "I'm not leaving," Grace said, kneeling down to his level so she could look directly into his eyes. "How would you feel about me staying? Not just as your tutor, but as a real part of your family?" Ethan's eyes widened in surprise and excitement. "Like, forever?" "We'll take it one day at a time, Ethan," Grace said carefully, wanting to manage his expectations. "But yes, if that's what you want, I'd really like to stay." Ethan launched himself at her with such enthusiastic force that they both tumbled backward onto the floor, dissolving into a fit of laughter. Alexander helped them both up, a warm smile spreading across his face as he watched the two people he loved most in the world. And for a brief, perfect moment, the three of them stood together in the library, an unlikely family forged in the fires of crisis and bound together by choice. Grace sat in the meticulously manicured garden of the Romano estate, the warm sun on her face as she worked on her final paper for her degree, her trusty laptop resting on her knees. She'd be graduating in just 3 short weeks, finally achieving the lifelong dream she'd fought so hard to attain. Ethan played nearby with a soccer ball, his laughter echoing through the air. His reading skills were now at grade level, a remarkable achievement thanks to months of dedicated work, the right kind of support, and Grace's unwavering belief in him. He still faced challenges, of course, but he now confronted them with a newfound confidence, knowing that he had people who truly believed in him no matter what. Alexander emerged from the house, loosening his tie as he walked towards them, a familiar gesture that always made Grace's heart flutter. The sight of him still made her heart skip a beat, but now that sensation was accompanied by a deep, profound sense of belonging, a feeling of finally being home. "How's the paper coming?" he asked, dropping a gentle kiss on the top of her head. "Almost done," Grace replied, smiling up at him. "Dr. Martinez said it's some of my best work." "I never doubted it for a second," Alexander said, his voice filled with pride. He sat down beside her on the bench, watching Ethan expertly dribble the soccer ball across the lawn. "Grace, there's something I want to ask you," he began, his voice suddenly serious. Grace looked up from her laptop, immediately noticing the slight nervousness in his expression. A rare sight for a man who was usually so composed and in control. "We've been building this life together for months now," he continued, his eyes locking with hers. "You, me, Ethan. And I honestly can't imagine it any other way." He paused, taking a deep breath before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, velvet box. Grace's breath caught in her throat. "I'm not asking you to be saved or protected, Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, my love. Grace Miller, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Grace's face as she gazed at the ring, a beautiful, elegant piece that wasn't ostentatious or flashy, but perfectly suited to her understated taste. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you, Alexander." Ethan, who had been watching them intently from his play area, dropped the soccer ball and ran over, shouting at the top of his lungs. "She said yes. She said yes." Grace pulled him into a tight embrace, wanting to include him in this incredibly special moment. "If that's okay with you." "It's more than okay," Ethan said, squeezing her tightly. "Seriously, it's perfect." As the three of them sat together in the sun-drenched garden, Grace reflected on the long and winding journey that had brought her to this exact place, this exact moment in time. She'd impulsively thrown herself over a crying boy as danger erupted around them, acting purely on instinct and compassion, without a second thought for her own safety. That single, selfless moment had irrevocably changed everything, pulling her from her carefully constructed, solitary life into something infinitely messier, more complicated, and infinitely richer than she could have ever imagined. She'd learned that being saved and being strong weren't mutually exclusive concepts, that accepting help didn't diminish her independence or invalidate her strength, and that love could be found in the most unexpected places, even amidst chaos and danger. Grace looked at Alexander and Ethan, her family now, and felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. Not the superficial peace of being completely safe from all potential harm, but the deep, abiding peace of knowing she'd finally found exactly where she belonged. She'd crossed every line, broken every rule, and taken every conceivable risk to get here, and she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she'd do it all again in a heartbeat.